The monthly Gonzalez family gatherings weren't so much about food as they were about a financial exhibition. That night, at a sprawling estate on the outskirts of Vale du Sol, promised to be particularly unbearable. I took my usual spot near the fireplace, discreetly observing as my cousins vied to outbrag each other. "Just snapped up a ranch in Fairfield," Paul drawled, swirling his wine. "Right next door to the guy who owns half of Silicon Valley." Clara scoffed, flipping open her designer clutch with a flourish. "We just closed on a vineyard in Green Hills. And private access to the Azure Coast? That's priceless." I hid my smile behind my iced tea. If only they knew. Ella, Aunt Elisa's voice cut across the table sharply. "You're awfully quiet." Paul leaned forward, his false sympathy dripping. "We were just wondering about your living situation." There it was. "What about it?" I replied, setting down my glass. "This cramped duplex in Portview," he continued smoothly. "Renting, right? The one on Elm Street." Clara chimed in, feigning surprise. "Didn't realize people our age still rented." I almost laughed. The Elm Street complex was my company's first commercial acquisition under West Group. To them, I was a struggling tenant. In reality, I was the landlord. "I like the space," I said evenly. "You're 35, dear," Elisa added with a condescending smile. "Time to grow up and buy something real." Real? How about a $1.8 billion portfolio of multifamily buildings, commercial towers, and yes, Gonzalez Plaza itself, the very property they gathered at monthly. 6 months ago, I'd quietly acquired it through a private equity arm they'd never traced back to me. "I've been doing just fine," I replied. Paul smirked. "You probably can't even afford a mortgage." I leaned back and let them talk, because soon enough, their lease renewal would land on their tables. And guess whose name would be on the letterhead? Dad finally looked up from his wine glass. Now, Paul, not everyone is blessed with your sharp instincts. Ella has chosen her path," Aunt Elisa finished with a sigh, as if I'd disappointed them by not marrying a hedge fund manager or becoming a lifestyle blogger. They pictured me spending my days showing dingy apartments to broke grad students, barely scraping by on commission checks. What they didn't know was that Ella Brown, the family oddball, was also West Group, the anonymous firm that had been quietly buying up commercial and residential properties across the Pacific Northwest for the past decade. Speaking of real estate, Clara interjected with a glint in her eye. "Did you hear about that situation on Elm Street? Some company bought up the entire block. They're going to tear everything down," she added with false pity. "Guess your little apartment is finally going to disappear." I kept my expression neutral. I was the buyer, and I had no intention of demolishing anything. The Elm Street complex was a hidden gem. Brick facades, vintage detailing, and rent control for families who had lived there for decades. I was in the middle of a historically respectful renovation. "Really?" I asked. "Haven't heard about it." "Well, of course not," Paul scoffed. "Deals of that size are way beyond your league. If you get evicted," Elisa said brightly, "you can always come back to the guest house. We'll help you find something more respectable, maybe even someone respectable." "I'm happy," I said dryly. Clara gave a tight laugh. "You can't live a small life forever, darling. Brown used to mean something in this state. It still did, just not in the way they thought." In real estate circles, West Pine was synonymous with ethical growth and tenant-first investing, the opposite of my cousin's flashy developments that steamrolled communities for clout. "Actually," Dad said, setting down his glass, "this gathering is partly about business. The board is concerned about the new owner of Gonzalez Plaza." He tilted his head. "West Group bought a controlling interest 6 months ago," he stated. "No one knows who they are, possibly some foreign investor." Paul nodded sagely. "Has to be. Those tycoons love historic properties. If only they knew their dreaded mystery investor was sitting right there in a thrift store cardigan and worn boots." "And now," Dad continued, "they're asking tough questions, especially about our accounting practices. Creative accounting, like how Paul borrowed from the building fund to finance his Fairfield retreat, or how Clara labeled her designer handbags as client entertainment expenses." "I'm sure it's nothing serious," Aunt Elisa said, her pearls trembling slightly. "The Brown name still carries weight." "That's exactly it," Dad cut in. "This West Pine person doesn't seem impressed by names. They've called for a full audit." I watched the shift ripple through their faces. the panic veiled by designer smiles. An audit would reveal more than just questionable expenses. It would unravel their entire game. Maybe Ella can help, Clara said suddenly, her tone saccharine. She works in real estate, doesn't she? Maybe she knows someone at the management company. All eyes turned to me at once. Just like that, I was no longer an embarrassment. I was potentially useful. I mostly work with smaller residential clients, I said smoothly. Nothing on the scale of Gonzalez Plaza. For heaven's sake, Paul snapped, can't you even help your own family? Mom shot him a warning glance, but her silence spoke volumes. Even Dad went back to scrolling on his phone, uninterested in defending me. They had no idea just how helpful I was about to be, just not in the way they expected. The next morning, West Group would release a public statement. Effective immediately, Gonzalez Plaza would undergo a major operational overhaul. No more slush funds, no more nepotistic contracts, no more using the building as a family credit card. I glanced around the penthouse. Artwork bought with maintenance fees, sofas marked up threefold, light fixtures installed by Clara's husband's company with inflated invoices. Anyway, I said, standing up and brushing off my jeans, some of us have busy mornings. Clara smirked. Going to show more rent-controlled studios. I slung my worn leather bag over my shoulder. Inside, the agenda for the board meeting, legal documents, and renovation proposals were worth more than anything in that room. Aunt Elisa called sweetly, next time perhaps dress more like a Brown. Appearances matter. I smiled. Don't worry, I said. Tomorrow I'll look exactly how the Browns expect. They just didn't realize I was already in charge. The next morning, I was in my real office, an entire penthouse floor overlooking downtown Portview, and I braced myself for the moment I'd been planning for over a year. My assistant, Iris, glided in, placing a cappuccino beside my laptop. The Gonzalez Plaza board is already assembled, she said. Your family arrived early, trying to charm the independent members. I smirked, picturing Paul and Clara working the room in desperation. Audit packets all printed and distributed. The forensics team uncovered even more than expected. She paused. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Once they know, there's no turning back. They need to learn, I said calmly, that legacy isn't a license to abuse power. I turned to the glass, watching my reflection. The jeans and cardigan were gone. Today, I wore a dark navy suit, sharp lines, quiet strength, the kind of look Aunt Elisa dreamed I'd wear to meet a husband. Instead, I'd use it to dismantle their house of cards. The ownership announcement goes live in 20 minutes, Iris added. Once it does, you'll be outed. Then let's begin, I said, picking up my briefcase. The Gonzalez Plaza boardroom hushed as I entered. My family was huddled at the far end, discomposed, underdressed, and visibly shaken. Who are you? Paul blurted out. This is a private meeting. I placed my briefcase calmly at the head of the table. I'm Ella Brown, I said, founder and sole owner of West Group, the company that owns this building and several others your family has been illegally leveraging. Elisa went ashen. Clara's lips parted, but no sound came out. My father's hands tightened on his pen. Ella, he breathed. I nodded. Good morning. I opened my briefcase and began sliding audit reports across the table. Shall we review your financials? This is insane, Paul stammered. You're just a tenant, the woman with the thrift store clothes. Clara blinked. But you show apartments. I work, I said simply, and I've built something real with integrity, not illusion. The board watched in stunned silence as the proud Brown family began to unravel, one page at a time. These folders, I stated, contain detailed documentation of every misused fund, inflated invoice, and falsified receipt. Reports of financial malfeasance involving Gonzalez Plaza's accounts. I began distributing the final set of documents. Paul, would you care to explain the $2 million in roof repairs that funded your Fairfield estate? He went so red, so fast, I thought he might faint. Or Clara, I continued, flipping to the next page. Perhaps you'd like to walk us through your husband's invoices, charging 3 times the market rate for basic plumbing? Would you air your own family's dirty laundry like this? Aunt Elisa gasped. No, I said evenly, you aired it. I'm just making sure it gets cleaned. Dad finally spoke, his voice low and pleading. Ella, dear, we can explain. Don't. I held up a hand. I've watched this family treat our great-grandfather's legacy like a personal ATM. While you sneered at my so-called humble life, I was building something better on values, not vanity. But why? Clara asked, bewildered. Why pretend to be struggling? I didn't pretend anything, I replied. I lived modestly, I invested wisely. You assumed wealth had to be loud. The Elm Street building, Paul said, his voice laced with shock. You actually live there? I own it, I corrected, and most of the block. And no, I'm not tearing it down because some of us care about people, not just returns. Suddenly, phones around the table buzzed. A board member's eyes widened as he read his screen. West Group reveals CO identity. Ella Brown, distant relative of Brown family, confirmed as owner of $2 billion real estate portfolio. Clara dropped her phone, muttering, ranked among top ethical developers, historic preservation, tenant protection. This will ruin us. No, I said firmly, this will save you from yourselves. Starting today, Gonzalez Plaza will operate transparently. No more shell games. No more sweetheart deals. And if we don't comply. Paul tried to sound defiant, but his voice wavered. He then smiled weakly. I will pass these reports to the authorities. I'm sure the IRS will find them enlightening. The silence became thick. What do you want? Dad finally asked. I want you to remember what the Brown name stood for before all this. I met their eyes one by one. Our great-grandfather built communities, not just profit margins. I stood, gathering my papers. You have a choice. Work with me to restore that legacy, I said evenly, or find somewhere else to live. I hear there are great rentals in Serene Lake. I turned to leave. Ella, wait. Dad's voice stopped me just as I reached the door. I was wrong about you. Yes, I replied quietly. The aftermath unfolded like something out of a corporate drama. The media couldn't get enough of the unassuming Portview heiress, who quietly built a real estate empire and dismantled her family's illusions in one board meeting. Aunt Elisa resigned from 3 local boards, too ashamed to show her face. Clara's husband's company went bankrupt weeks after the audit was released. But not all of it was bitter. Paul, facing real consequences for the first time, enrolled in a public university's real estate program. Clara started volunteering at a downtown homeless shelter. She told me later it gave her more purpose than her gallery openings ever had. And Dad? He asked to learn the business, not as a father reclaiming control, but as a student. This time he wanted to understand what I had built. 6 months later, I was sitting in my Elm Street apartment. Yes, I kept it, reviewing new quarterly reports. Gonzalez Plaza was thriving. Tenant leases were stable, satisfaction was up, and the small retailers on the ground floor were turning healthy profits. A knock interrupted my focus. I opened the door to find my mother. She was in jeans and no makeup. It took me a moment to process the informality. I got your invitation, she said, holding it up. A holiday potluck on the patio. I nodded. Not exactly your scene. No, she admitted, glancing around my modest space. But I'm learning that maybe the beach isn't everything. She picked up a photo of me at 23, beaming at my real estate licensing ceremony. I never asked, she said, why this path? Because I wanted to build something real, I replied, not just buy and flaunt. And now, she murmured, you control more than all of us. I do control, I agreed, but control isn't the goal, purpose is. She looked at me earnestly. Would you teach me? Come tonight, I said. Meet the families who've lived here for decades, listen. That's where the legacy begins. Later, I stood by my window, watching the lights twinkle across Portview, this city I had quietly made my own. Gonzalez Plaza glowed in the distance, no longer a monument to greed, but a symbol of restoration. Below me, the Elm Street building hummed with quiet life. The brickwork, the original timber beams, the garden courtyards were carefully preserved. My phone buzzed with new messages. Partnership offers, speaking invitations, acquisition deals. West Group was in high demand now, but I kept my schedule human-sized, my routine grounded. Success for me wasn't about outshining my past. It was about building something that mattered, something that would last. Sometimes the person they pity becomes the one they need to learn from. And sometimes the best kind of triumph doesn't roar, it endures. A week later, at the Elm Street holiday potluck, I stood near the garden fountain, watching my family navigate a world they once scorned. Mom was sitting beside Mrs. Davis, a tenant who'd lived there for 38 years, listening with genuine interest. Paul helped Mr. Evans, a World War II veteran and the building's longest resident, hang lights. Clara laughed beside a table of children, decorating sugar cookies with frosting. Slowly, they were learning that true wealth wasn't in what you could flaunt, but in what you preserved, in what you shared, in what you lifted up. Dad joined me by the hot chocolate station. "You know," he said, "your great-grandfather believed buildings should shelter hearts, not just wallets." I nodded. I'd found his old ledgers, handwritten notes about tenant protection. We forgot that. He looked at me, not as a daughter who'd gone astray, but as someone who had carried the torch he'd dropped. "You could have ruined us." "That was never the point," I said, watching a little girl twirl under the fairy lights. "I wanted to build something bigger. And sometimes, the greatest success isn't proving them wrong, it's offering them a better version of right." What did you think of Ella's story? Tell us in the comments what you would have done in her place. If you enjoyed this story, please like and share this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about resilience.